In the year 1878, Dr. John Watson took his degree of Doctor of Medicine of the University of London. Upon his completion, Dr. Watson was in need of housing, as he had been residing in a hotel, being somewhat unsuccessful in finding an abode. Upon an evening, Dr. Watson went to the Criterion Bar when someone tapped him on the shoulder. Turning round, he recognized an old friend, Stamford. The sight of a friendly face in the great wilderness of London was a pleasant thing indeed for Dr. Watson.
Whatever have you been doing with yourself, Watson?
Looking for lodgings, trying to solve the problem as to whether it is possible to get comfortable rooms at a reasonable price.
Well, that's a strange thing. You're the second man today to use that expression to me.
Well, who was the first?
A fellow who's working up at the chemical laboratory at the hospital. He was bemoaning himself today, telling me about how he was having a difficult time finding someone to go house with him on some nice rooms in which he had found, which were too much for his purse.
By Jove, if he really wants someone to share the rooms and the expense, I am the very man for him. I should prefer having a partner to being alone.
You don't know Sherlock Holmes yet. Perhaps you wouldn't care for him as a constant companion.
Why? What is there against him?
Oh, I didn't say I had anything against him. He's a little queer in his ideas, an enthusiast in some branches of science. As far as I know, he's a decent fellow enough. His studies are very eccentric, and he's amassed a lot of out-of-the-way knowledge, which would astonish his professors.
I should like to meet him. If I am to lodge with anyone, I should prefer a man of studious and quiet habits. I am not yet strong enough to stand much noise or excitement. How could I meet this friend of yours?
Well, he's sure to be at the laboratory. If you'd like, we shall drive together after the luncheon.
Certainly.
Stamford called for a carriage to bring he and Dr. Watson to the laboratory at the Royal London Hospital on Whitechapel Road, where a one Mr. Sherlock Holmes was conducting an experiment.
Now, Watson, you mustn't blame me if you don't get on with him.
You need not worry, Stamford. If we don't get on, it will be easy to part company.
Well, very well then. Ah, there he is, Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
How are you? I perceive you've been in Afghanistan.
How on earth did you know that?
Never mind. The question now is about hemoglobin. Why, man, it is the most important medico-legal discovery in years. Don't you see that it could give us an infallible test for blood stains? Come over here, now. So, let me add a small quantity of blood to this liter of water. The proportion of blood cannot be more than 1 in a million. I have no doubt, however, that we shall obtain the characteristic reaction. Aha, there it is. What did you think of that?
Well, it seems to be a very delicate test.
Criminal cases are continually hinging upon that one test. A man is suspected of a crime months, perhaps, after it's been committed. His linen or clothes are examined and brownish stains discovered upon them. Are they blood stains, mud stains, rust stains, fruits? What kind of stains are they? That is the question which has puzzled many an expert. And why? Because there was no reliable test. Now we have the Sherlock Holmes test, and there will no longer be any difficulty.
Holmes, we came here on business. My friend here wants to take diggings, and as you were complaining just this morning that you could not find someone to go house with you, I thought I'd better bring you together.
Yeah, really? Well, I do have my eye on a suite in Baker Street. The owner, Mrs. Hudson, seemed peculiar at best. However, she kept an apartment immaculate and ideal for a location. Do you mind a strong woman running the household?
Not at all.
I generally have chemicals about and occasionally do experiments. Would that annoy you?
By no means.
Let me see. What other are my shortcomings? I get into the dumps at times and don't open my mouth for days on end. He must not think I'm sulky when I do that. Just let me alone and I'll soon be right. Do you include violin playing in your category of rows?
It depends on the player. A well-played violin is a treat for the gods. A badly played one.
Oh, that's all right. I think we may consider the thing as settled.
Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes met the next day at number 221B Baker Street. The apartment consisted of a couple of comfortable bedrooms and a single large, airy sitting room, cheerfully furnished and illuminated by two broad windows. Dr. Watson, though his new roommate was certainly not a difficult man to live with, he was quiet in his ways and his habits were regular. As the weeks went by, Dr. Watson increased his interest in Sherlock Holmes, and his curiosity as to his aims in life gradually deepened and increased. Holmes had a zeal for certain studies and was remarkable, and within eccentric limits his knowledge was so extraordinarily ample and minute that his observations have fairly astounded to Watson. At 10 after 7 in the evening, the two men, reading their respective books, were distracted at a knock at the door from a courier.
Mr. Holmes, you've received a letter.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Could you give it to Dr. Watson? Would you, Watson, read the letter for me?
It's addressed to you, Mr. Holmes. I don't much appreciate giving personal information to someone to who it's not addressed.
We understand, Mrs. Hudson. It's perfectly fine. I'll keep your discretion.
Well, very well.
Upon giving the letter to Dr. Watson, noted the papers was stock of official caliber. Opening the envelope, the letter read,
My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, there has been a bad business during the night at 3 Lauriston Gardens off the Brixton Road. We discovered the body of a gentleman well dressed and having cards in his pocket bearing the name of Enoch J. Drebber, South Point, Cardiff. Now, there had been no robbery, nor is there any evidence as to how the man met his death. There are marks of blood in the room, but there is no wound upon his person. We are at a loss as to how he came into the empty house. Indeed, the whole affair is a puzzler. If you can come around to the house any time before 12, you will find me there. I have left everything in status quo until I hear from you. If you are unable to come, I shall give you fuller details and would esteem it a great kindness if you would favor me with your opinion. Yours faithfully, signed, Inspector G. Lestrade.
Lestrade from Scotland Yard? Watson, Lestrade is the pick of a bad lot.
Why are you sitting? Surely there is not a moment to be lost. He begs you to help him.
Yes, he knows that I am his superior and acknowledges it to me. But he would cut his tongue out before he would own it to a third person. However, may as well go and have a look. I shall work it out on my own hook. I may have a laugh at them if I have nothing else. Come on, you should join me.
Upon arrival, Dr. Watson noted that number 3 Lauriston Gardens wore an ill-omened and minatory look. It was one of 4 which stood back some little way from the street, 2 being occupied and 2 empty. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant, melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary.
It is kind of you to come, Mr. Holmes. I have left everything untouched. All we found was a woman's wedding ring, so we know a woman must have been in the room.
Then let us go look at the room.
Dr. Watson's attention was centered upon the single, grim, motionless figure which lay stretched upon the boards, with vacant, sightless eyes staring up at the discolored ceiling. It was that of a man about 43 or 44 years of age, middle-sized, broad-shouldered, with crisp, curling black hair and a short, stubbly beard. He was dressed in a heavy broadcloth frock coat and waistcoat, with light-colored trousers and immaculate collar and cuffs. A top hat and well-brushed was placed upon the floor beside him. His hands were clenched and his arms thrown abroad, while his lower limbs were interlocked as though his death struggle had been a grievous one. On his rigid face, there stood an expression of horror and hatred, such as Dr. Watson had never seen upon human features.
This case will make a stir, Mr. Holmes. It beats anything I have ever seen. There is no wound.
Well, with all these blood splashes, are you sure that there is no wound?
Positive.
Then, of course, this belongs to a second individual, presumably the murderer, if murder has been committed. You could take him to the mortuary now. There's nothing more to be learned. With that said, Lestrade, I have just made a discovery of the highest importance and one which would have been overlooked had I not made a careful examination of the walls.
What?
Come here. Now, stand there and look at that.
Oh, my word. There's blood scrawled in a single word. Rach. What do you think of that? This was overlooked because it was in the darkest corner of the room. The murderer had written it with his or her own blood. That disposes of the idea of suicide anyhow. That means the writer was going to put the female name Rachel, but was disturbed before he or she had time to finish. You mark my words, when this case comes to be cleared up, you will find that a woman named Rachel has something to do with it. Well, it's all very well for you to laugh, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. You may be very smart and clever, but the old hound is at the best when all is said and done.
You are doing so well now that it would be a pity for anyone to interfere. If you will let me know how your investigations go, I shall be happy to give you any help I can. In the meantime, I should like to speak to the maid who found the body. Can you give me her name and address?
I have it here. Jane Rance. You will find her at 46 Audley Court, Kensington Park Gate.
Come along, Doctor. We shall go and look her up. I'll tell you one thing which may help you in this case. There has been a murder done, and the murderer was a man. He was more than 6 feet high, was in the prime of his life, had small feet for his height, wore coarse, square-toed boots, and smoked a Trichinopoly cigar. He came here with his victim in a four-wheeled cab, which was drawn by a horse, with 3 old shoes and 1 new one on his off foreleg. In all probability, the murderer had a florid face, and the fingernails of his right hand were remarkably long. These are only a few indications, but they may assist you.
Well, if the man was murdered, how was it done?
Poison. One other thing, Lestrade. Ratsch is a German word for revenge, so don't lose your time looking for a Miss Rachel. Come along, Watson. There's nothing like first-hand evidence. As a matter of fact, my mind is made up on the case, but still we may as well learn all that is to be learned.
You amaze me, Holmes. Surely you are not as sure as you pretend to be about all of those particulars which you gave?
There is no room for mistake. The very first thing which I observed on arriving there was that a cab had made 2 ruts with its wheels close to the curb. Now, up to last night, we have had no rain for a week, so that those wheels which left such a deep impression must have been there during the night. Since the cab was there after the rain began, it follows that it must have been there during the night, and therefore that it brought those 2 individuals to the house.
Well, that seems simple enough. But how about the man's height?
Why, the height of a man in 9 cases out of 10 can be told from the length of his stride. It's a simple calculation enough, though there is no use me boring you with my figures. I had this fellow stride both on the clay outside and on the dust within. Then I had a way of checking my calculation. When a man writes on a wall, his instinct leads him to write about the level of his own eyes. Now, that writing was just over 6 feet from the ground. It was child's play. For his age, if a man can stride 4.5 feet with the smallest effort, he can't be quite in the Syrian yellow. That was the breadth of a puddle on the garden walk, which he had evidently walked across. I can simply apply to this ordinary life a few of those things, precepts of observation and deduction, which I've advocated in this article.
The more one thinks of it, the more mysterious it grows. How came these two men, if there were two men, into an empty house? What has become of the cabman who drove them? How could one man compel another to take poison? Where did the blood come from? What was the object of the murderer, since robbery had no part in it? How came the woman's ring there? Above all, why should the second man write up the German word rape before decamping? I confess that I cannot see any possible way of reconciling all of these facts.
You sum up the difficulties of the situation succinctly and well. There is much that is still obscure, though I have quite made up my mind to the main facts. As to poor Lestrade's discovery, it was simply a blind intended to put the police upon a wrong track by suggesting a German. The A, if you noticed, was printed somewhat after the German fashion. Now, a real German invariably prints in the Latin character, so that we may safely say that this was not written by one, but by a imitator who overdid his part.
And what do you think of the maid who found the body?
Yeah, let us knock at the door and see.
I'll tell ye from the beginning. My time to arrive is 6 in the morning, and during the morning I saw a light in the window, so I thought maybe something was wrong. You see, when I got up to the door, it was so still and so lonesome that I thought I'd be none for the worse with someone with me. I ain't afeard of nothing this side of the grave, but I thought maybe it was him that died of the typhoid inspecting the drams what killed him. The thought gave me kind of a turn, so I walked back to the gate to see if I could see anyone else. There was not a living soul, sir, nor as much as a dog. I pulled myself together, I went back to the gate and pushed the door open. All was quiet inside, so I went into the room where the light was a-burning, and there was a candle flickering on the mantelpiece, a red wax one. And by the light, I saw a dead...
Yes, I know all that you saw. You walked round the room several times, and you knelt down by the body, and then you walked through and tried the kitchen door, and then...
I went back to the gate and called for a constable.
Was the street empty then?
Well, it was, as far as anyone that could be of any good goes.
What do you mean?
I've seen many a drunk chap in my time, but never is anyone so crying drunk as that cove. He was at the gate when I came out, leaning against the railing and a singing at the top of his lungs about Columbine's newfangled banner of some sort. Couldn't stand far less help.
Huh. What sort of man was he?
He was an uncommon drunk sort of man, I'd say. He had found himself in the station if we hadn't been so took up. He was a long chap with a red face and the lower part muffled round wearing a brown overcoat.
What became of him?
Don't know. I'll wager he found himself home all right.
Thank you for your time. Come along, Doctor.
Why the quick departure?
The maid does not have detective skills, Watson. She was played. The criminal returned for that ring, man. The ring. That was what he came back for.
Why, the man in the brown coat? The murderer?
If my view of the case is correct, and I have every reason to believe that it is, this man would rather risk anything than lose that ring. According to my notion, he dropped it while stooping over Drebber's body and did not miss it at the time. After leaving the house, He discovered his loss and hurried back, but found the maid calling the police. He had to pretend to be drunk in order to allay the suspicions which might have been aroused by his appearance at the gate.
Of course.
Knowing that, he saw a woman looking for a constable. He may also think she found the ring. Therefore, I have placed in today's paper that a ring was found and may be picked up at our home. He may eagerly look out for the evening paper in the hope of seeing it among the articles found. His eye, of course, would light upon this. He would be overjoyed. Why should he fear a trip or a trap? There would be no reason in his eyes why the finding of the ring should be connected with the murder. He would come. He will come.
And then?
Oh, you could leave that to me to deal with then. Have your revolver ready.
Mr. Holmes, you have a visitor.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson.
Mr. Holmes, I don't take kindly to my tenants having female visitors late at night.
Female. Mrs. Hudson, it will only be a moment, I assure you. Yes, ma'am, may I help you?
Oh, does Dr. Watson live here? It's this newspaper that brought me, good gentlemen. A gold wedding ring in the Brixton Road. It belongs to my girl Sally, as was married only a 12-month, which her husband is a steward aboard a Union boat, and what would you say became home and found her without a wedding ring is more than I can think. He being short enough at the best of times, but more especially with a drink. If it please you, she went to the circus last night.
Is that her ring?
Lord be thanked. Sally will be a glad woman indeed. That is the ring.
And what may your address be?
13 Duncan Street, Houndsditch. A weary way from here.
The Brixton Road does not lie between Circus and Houndsditch.
Oh, well, the gentleman asked for my address. Oh, Sally lives at lodgings at 3 Mayfield Place, Peckingham. My name is Sawyer. Her name is Dennis, which Tom Dennis married her, a smart, clean lad too, and as long as he's at sea and no steward in the company more thought of, but when unsure, what with the women and with the liquor.
Here's your ring, Mrs. Sawyer. It clearly belongs to your daughter, and I'm glad to be able to restore it to the rightful owner.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. You are kind, and Sally will greatly be appreciative. Good
evening. Watson, I'll give a moment, and then I'll follow her. She must be an accomplice, and will lead me to him. I'll be back, Watson. Wish me well.
It was close upon 9 when Holmes set out. Dr. Watson remained and had no idea how long Holmes would be. Watson sat stolidly puffing at his pipe and skipping over the edges of a newspaper. 10 o'clock passed, and Watson heard the footsteps of the maid as they pattered off to bed. 11, and the more stately tread Mrs. Hudson passed the door, bound for the same destination. It was close upon 12 before Watson heard the sharp sound of his latchkey. The instant Holmes entered, Watson could tell by his face that he had not been successful.
Holmes, what happened?
Well, I don't mind telling you. A story against myself. The creature had gone a little way when she began to limp and show every sign of being footsore when she hailed a four-wheeler. Having seen her safely inside, I perched myself behind the cab. That's an art which every detective should be expert at, of course. Well, away we rattled. As we neared our destination, I hopped off before we came to the door and strolled down the street. The driver jumped down, and I saw him open the door and stand expectantly. Nothing came out, though. When I reached him, he was groping about frantically in the empty cab and giving vent to the finest assorted collection of oaths that I've ever listened to. There was no sign or trace of the passenger, and I fear it will be some time before he gets his fare. On inquiring at number 13, we found that the house belonged to a respectable paper hanger named Keswick, and that no one of that name, either of Sawyer or Dennis, had ever been heard of there.
You don't mean to say that tottering, feeble old woman was able to get out of the cab while it was in motion without either you or the driver seeing her?
Old woman be damned. We were the old woman to be taken in.
Huh.
Must have been a young man and an active one, too. Besides being an incomparable actor, the getup was inimitable. He saw that he was followed, no doubt, and used the means of giving me the slip. It shows that the man we are after is not lonely as I imagined he was, but has friends who are ready to risk something for him.
As Sherlock Holmes predicted, the next day's papers were full of the Brixton mystery, as they termed it. The Daily News observed that there was no doubt to the crime being a political one. Great steps had been gained by as a result of the acuteness and energy of Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard.
I told you that whatever happened, Lestrade would be sure to score. But I believe it is time for our detective police force. I call them the Baker Street Irregulars. Look out the window!
Huh. All I see is a half dozen of the dirtiest and most ragged street Arabs that ever I clapped eyes on.
Right there. Tension, irregulars. Have you found it, Wiggins?
No, sir, we hain't.
I hardly expected you would. Here are more coins. Now, off you go and check on the colonel and his brother. Get his name and come back with a better report next time.
Thank you, sir. We will. I'll see if we can scrounge up something from inside the colonel's house.
Off you go, lads.
By Jove, Holmes. Who is the colonel?
Ah, Watson. There's more to work to be got out of one of those little beggars than out a dozen of the force.
Mr. Holmes, and Inspector Lestrade is here to see you.
My dear fellow, congratulate me. I have made the whole thing as clear as day.
Do you mean that you are on the right track?
The right track? Why, sir, we have the man under lock and key. His name is Arthur Charpentier, Sub-Lieutenant in Her Majesty's Navy.
Well, we are anxious to hear how you managed it.
Of course, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, this is strictly between ourselves. Now, you remember the hat that was beside the dead man made by Underwood, yep? Well, when I went to visit Underwood and asked him if he had sold a hat of that size and description, he looked over his books and came on it at once. He had sent the hat to a Mr. Drebber residing at Charpentier's boarding establishment, Tarquay Terrace. Thus, I got at his address.
Smart. Very smart.
Yeah, and I next called Madame Charpentier, and I found her pale and distressed. Her daughter was in the room, too, an uncommonly fine girl. She is, too. She was looking red about the eyes, and her lips trembled as I spoke to her. That didn't escape my notice, and I began to smell a rat. You know the feeling, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, when you come upon the right scent, a kind of thrill in your nerves. Upon my visit, I asked Mrs. Charpentier if she had heard of the mysterious death of her late boarder, Mr. Enoch J. Drebber of Cardiff.
Well, did she?
Sure enough, Dr. Watson. Mrs. Charpentier did indeed give the details, and our murderer.
The home of the widow Charpentier and her 2 children was used as a lodging for rentals. Her most recent lodger was that of Mr. Drebber from Cardiff and his personal assistant, Ms. Amelia Stangerson. Upon one evening, while Miss Charpentier's son was running chores, her daughter Alice often worried of an intoxicated Mr. Drebber.
Oh, Mother, why do we rent our home to Mr. Drebber and his secretary? I don't feel comfortable when they're around. He's always looking at me and touching me. I don't like it when they're here.
I know, my darling. Please be strong as the hour is approaching 8 o'clock and Mr. Drebber is expected back. But do not worry, your brother Arthur is due back around the same hour.
Yes, sir, Mr. Drebber. It's been a long day indeed. Mind your step.
Indeed it has, Miss Stangerson. I rest before we are off again. How long before we must leave for our train? Do we have time for another drink?
Sir, there's a train at 9:15 and one at 11. Do you have a preference, and I will make the accommodations?
Alice, it would be best for you to go to your room now.
Ah, Mrs. Charpentier, good evening. And
Good
good evening to you too, Alice.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
My dear ladies, such an evening to see your lovely faces. It does remind me of when we traveled the continent. Do you remember Strangerson of that time?
All too well, sir.
Oh, that time traveling on the continent. I may have foolishly chosen that trip, fleeing the escape of retribution.
Sir, I am sorry, but I do not understand.
That time we went to flee such a pair, the mathematician and his companion, the Countess.
But Mr. Drebber, it is time for you to go about another subject.
Nonsense, Strangerson. You and I did our best to outplay a mathematician. How foolish we were. We should have known not to outwit.
Enough, Mr. Drebber.
Enough. There was enough. No, there was not enough. I need a drink, Mrs. Charpentier.
I am afraid we do not carry alcohol in this household.
Then it is enough. I will find a drink elsewhere.
Mother, Mr. Drebber seems unwell.
Most unwell. Please, do not speak of this with Mr. Drebber if you are to see him again. I will go look after him.
Mother, will Mr. Drebber not return?
Oh my! I do not think he has entirely left as I hear him at the side door.
There must be a drink here. Gerald, do you have a drink? You should bring it to me immediately, wench.
Mr. Drebber, you are not to speak to my daughter in that fashion.
I will speak how I want.
Oh!
Good evening, mother, sister.
Who dare is this?
I am Arthur Charpentier. And who, may I ask, are you? And why do you speak with such a brutish voice?
It was because of your sister. It was the mathematician and that countess that caused this. Now she is to get me a drink. Now, wench!
Do not speak in that tone to my mother, and do not for one moment think that I will allow you to speak with those words to my sister.
I will speak to her how I wish, and there is nothing you or anyone, even the countess or the mathematician, can do. Now, come here, my dear Alice, to provide me comfort.
How dare you!
Oh, Alice! Oh, Alice, my dear, my precious little girl, are you okay? Oh, Arthur! Arthur, are you okay?
Yes, mother, the man was able to catch me off my balance. Which way did he go?
He went down the street towards the train station.
Block this door and do open it for no one. I will be after him down the street right now.
That's quite an exciting series of events. What happened next?
Well, I found out where Lieutenant Charpentier was, took 2 officers with me, and arrested him. When I touched him on the shoulder and warned him to come quietly with us, he answered as bold as brass, "I suppose you are arresting me for being concerned in the death of that scoundrel Drebber." He still carried the heavy stick which the mother described him as having with him when he followed Drebber.
What is your theory, then?
Well, my theory is that he followed Drebber as far as the Brixton Road. when there a fresh altercation arose between them, in the course of which Drebber received a blow from the stick in the pit of his stomach, perhaps, which killed him without leaving any mark. The night was so wet that no one was about. So Charpentier dragged the body of his victim into the empty house. As to the candle and the blood and the writing on the wall and the ring, they may all be so many tricks to throw the police onto the wrong scent.
Well done. Really, Lestrade, you're getting along. What shall we make of something? Well, we shall make of something of you yet.
Well, I flatter myself that I have managed it rather neatly. The young man volunteered a statement in which he said that after Drebber, some time until he took a cab in order to get away from him. On his way home, he met an old shipmate and took a long walk with him. On being asked where his old shipmate lived, he was unable to give any satisfactory reply. I think the whole case fits together uncommonly neatly.
Excuse the interruption, Mr. Holmes, but a messenger just arrived from Scotland Yard, and he has insisted that I give this message to Inspector Lestrade.
Oh, thank you. Oh. It's an update on the secretary. Oh, my. The secretary, Miss Amelia Stangerson, was murdered at Halliday's private hotel about 6 o'clock this morning.
Stangerson, too? The plot thickens.
The cause of death was a deep stab in the left side, which must have penetrated the heart. And now comes the strangest part of the affair. What do you suppose was above the murdered woman? The word Roch, written in letters of blood.
I say, Lestrade, what does the second page of that message say?
Well, it is an inventory of the things in the room near the body. Interesting, there was a single telegram dated from Cardiff about a month ago and containing the words, "J.M. is in Europe." There was no name appended to this message.
And there was nothing else?
Nothing of any importance. Her novel, which she had read herself to sleep with, was lying upon the bed. There was a glass of water on the table, and on the windowsill a small chip ointment box containing a couple of pills.
Ah, the last link! My case is complete.
I say, by what means, Holmes?
I have now in my hands all the threads which have formed such a tangle. There are, of course, details to be filled in, but I am certain of the main facts. From the time that Drebber parted from Stangerson up to the discovery of the body of the latter, as if I had seen them with my own eyes. I will give you proof of my knowledge. Could you lay your hands upon some pills?
What is the name of your landlady?
Mrs. Hudson.
Mrs. Hudson, could I speak with the messenger from Scotland Yard?
As I told the errand boy, I do not much appreciate groups of people gathering in my home, whether it is my own abode or my rental. I believe in social distancing.
Mrs. Hudson, Inspector Lestrade needed to ask the messenger a question.
The errand boy is on the street, and Inspector Lestrade is welcome to walk outside and ask any questions of his pleasing.
Very well, gentlemen, give me a moment and I will confirm with our messenger if he brought the safety box with him.
Holmes, what are you gathered the pills from the secretary?
If you wait for a moment, it will all become very elementary, my dear Watson. You will see that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
I have them, Holmes. I have them. The safety box has all the items found with the body.
Give them here. Now, doctor, are these ordinary pills?
Well, they certainly are not. They are of a pearly gray color, small, round, almost transparent against the light. From their lightness and transparency, I should imagine that they are soluble in water.
Yeah, precisely so. Now, would you mind going down and fetching that poor little devil of a terrier, which has been bad so long, and which the landlady wanted you to put out of its pain yesterday?
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Put the dog out of its misery. The poor thing.
That dog is laboring to breathe, Watson. It is not far from its end.
Yeah. I will now cut one of those pills in two. One half we return into the box for the future purposes. The other half I will place in this wine glass, in which is a teaspoonful of water. You perceive that our friend, the doctor, is right, and that it readily dissolves.
This may be very interesting, but I cannot see, however, what it has to do with the death of Ms. Amelia Stangerson.
Patience, my friend, patience. You will find in time that it has everything to do with it. I shall now add a little milk to make this mixture palatable. And on presenting it to the dog, we find he laps it up readily enough. As you see, the dog drank the milk with the dissolved pill, but is apparently neither the better nor the worse for its draught.
What is the point?
It can't be a coincidence. It's impossible that it should be a mere coincidence. The very pills which I suspected in the case of Dreba are actually found after the death of Stangerson. And yet they are inert. What can it mean? Surely my whole chain of reasoning cannot have been false. It is impossible. And yet this wretched dog is none the worse. I have it. I have it. Well, one more pill to mix and give it to the dog.
Well, oh my word, Holmes. This time the unfortunate creature's tongue seems to hardly moisten before it gave a convulsive shiver in every limb and lay as rigid and lifeless as if it had been struck by lightning.
Yes, of the two pills in that box, one was of the most deadly poison, and the other was entirely harmless. I understand that seems strange to you, because you failed at the beginning of the inquiry to grasp the importance of a single real clue which was presented to you. I had the good fortune to seize upon that, and everything which has occurred since then has served to confirm my original suspicion, and indeed was the logical sequence of it. It is a mistake to confound strangeness with mystery. This murder would have been infinitely more difficult to unravel had the body of the victim been simply found lying in the roadway. These strange details, far from making the case more difficult, have really had the effect of making it less so.
Look here, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, we are all ready to acknowledge that you are a smart man and that you have your own methods of working. We want something more than some theory, though. I have made my case out, and it seems I was wrong. Young Charpentier could not have been engaged in the second affair regarding Mrs. Stangerson. You have thrown out little hints there and little hints there and seem to know more than we do, but the time has come when we feel that we have a right to ask you straight, how much do you know of this business? Can you name the man who did it?
Mr. Holmes, that filthy little rodent is here to see you. I'm not keen to have street urchins in my home.
Oh, Mrs. Hudson, you needn't worry. Wiggins here will be off in a moment. What have you found, lad?
We followed the colonel you told us to. He done led us to that woman. I think she knew we were watching as we were chased off. But we got a name. They called her Countess.
Good work, lad. Was there anything else?
There was a man with her. He seen us also. He had a cane. I remember that cane anywhere, because I saw it well enough.
Was the handle of that cane that of an Egyptian king cobra snake?
I don't know about the Egypt, but the snake had wings of a head and a tongue that spat out a horrid sight, and I'd sure call that a cane.
Holmes, really? Any delay in arresting the assassin might give him time to perpetrate some fresh atrocity.
Gentlemen, you've asked me if I know the name of the assassin. Well, I do. The mere knowing of his name is a small thing, though, compared with the power of laying our hands upon him. What I suspect is if he had the slightest of suspicion of Wiggins, he has already changed his name and vanished in an instant among the 4 million inhabitants of this city. He's a master of disguise and has fooled even Watson and me.
Erroneous! Erroneous! Erroneous on your theory! Tell me something, Holmes. Is there anything that we do know for sure?
Yes.
What?
That without a doubt, there is an evil mastermind behind all of this. The reason for the murders was for revenge for Drebber stealing a ring belonging to his mistress, the Countess, which he gave to Miss Stangerson. So aloof is he from general suspicion, so immune from criticism, so admirable in his management and self-effacement that he could haul you into court and emerge with your 4 years' pension. But it was his passion that caused a criminal strain that runs through his blood and murder his desire.
Oh my word. A mistress, a stolen ring, and a vengeful heart. A love triangle.
Enough, Holmes. Who is the assassin?
I'm afraid it's not Arthur Charpentier, for his family was caught up in the tangle web by accident. Drebber could not handle the drink and caused many enemies, I would suspect, including Charpentier. But his story about leaving the trail of Drebber and meeting an old friend is likely true. Lestrade, if you need be, seek out a friend and confirm the alibi.
Holmes, I understand now. We are in reach of the criminal. His name. Tell us.
Dr. Watson, it was Lestrade who told us who the assassin was.
I did?
Lestrade, in your story of Miss Charpentier and her daughter, you mentioned a mathematician who knew of a countess. I'm afraid to say there is only one person with the intellect of a mathematician known to a countess who is also a highly ruthless criminal mastermind, clever enough to bring destruction, and is purely adept at committing any atrocity to perfection without losing any sleep over it. Upon Wiggins' confirmation that our assassin had the cobra snake cane and was with the Countess, I knew it could only be one man.
I say, Holmes, all this time, the criminal was the mathematician? I would never have suspected a man of the university to be so ruthless. All that is left is to reveal the name.
Holmes, enough. Say his name. Who?
His name is Professor James Moriarty.
Thank you for joining us this evening for our presentation of Sherlock Holmes, A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I am Sharon Price, your narrator.
I'm Shana and I played Wiggins.
Hi, Jamie Churchill is Amelia Stangerson.
Fran Jansta as the dreaded Mr. Drebber.
I'm Lindsay Yates Badkey, and I played Alice.
I'm Jessica Augustine, and I played Mrs. Charpentier.
Michelle McLennan, and I played the old lady.
Hello, I'm Gabe Capozzo. I played Stamford and Arthur Charpentier.
Madison Mantis playing Jane Rance.
Hello, I'm Rose Mader, and I played Mrs. Hudson.
I'm John Hatterline, and I played Inspector Lestrade.
Ralph Churchill, Dr. Watson.
I'm John Franco. I played Sherlock Holmes. And the COVID-19 players would like to thank you for tuning in to Terry O'Brien's adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous play, A Study in Scarlet. Now, if you'll excuse me.